Hello and welcome back to GraphQL with Django. So this is part 4. Now in the previous tutorial we went through a CRUD example and I gave you kind of a baseline idea of how you can work with GraphQL and CRUD, create, return, update and delete. In this tutorial we're going to work towards building a user management system with GraphQL. So this is a big jump really from the past tutorials, but this is get us straight into the middle of building with GraphQL and Django. So we're going to work towards a user management system. We're only going to be working in this tutorial in the back end. So we will build some queries with Graph and then kind of extract information and perform some activities as if we were working on the front end, but we won't actually build the front end in this tutorial. So focusing on the back end, we'll allow the user to be able to log in and log out, of course. We'll utilize JWT again with Graph. And then we'll allow the user to actually sign up, and then we'll send them an email confirmation. They need to click on that link and then activate their account. So that's kind of like the process or flow that we'll build, the core kind of features of this management system. And then we go off and potentially have a look at some other areas. So changing passwords. If the user forgets their password, an email will be sent to them. And then they'll be able to actually then utilize that link to change their password. And other types of features we might want to include delete accounts, update account details, for example. So I think this covers all the kind of basic elements you might want to build if you're using or building a user management system for your application. Right, so we have Visual Studio Code open. Let's get started. So the first stage is obviously we're just going to build a simple application. Okay, so I've had a few comments about different things. So we are just building an application for no particular reason other than to practice, develop our understanding of how to use GraphQL. And obviously we're using this vehicle, which is going to be our authentication system or our user system we're building to obviously learn a little bit more about Graph. So this doesn't represent a production level application. This just is an application to learn a little bit more about GraphQL. Okay, so by means, just skip ahead, build a new application. Let's just go through this for anyone who's new. So I'm going to create a new file here. I'm going to just call this commands.txt. This will be available in the repo if you need it. So first of all, I'm working on Windows, so I'm going to need to build a small virtual environment, or I'm going to work in a virtual environment. So I'm going to run these commands here, and that's going to build a new folder you see in my working directory here. And that's then going to allow me then to go into this virtual environment, and I'm going to start this. So this is a lightweight virtual environment that allows me kind of to build this program in this virtual environment. And that just kind of separates this application from the existing Python that's installed on my machine. And basically I'm just working in a small lightweight virtual environment. So once you've installed that, we just need to kind of activate this by going into the folder for this. So here I'm just going to navigate to that activate it. You can see now it says vemp here, or venv, and now I know that I'm inside my virtual machine. So from here I can use pip, the package manager, to install Django. That's a funny noise on my microphone. I apologize for that. I'm not entirely sure why that is happening, but that will go away in a second. So once this is installed, we've now installed Django. So let's do that. So now we've installed Django, we can use the Django admin to create a new project. So let's start a new project. I always call my project core. And I'm using the dot as the extra parameter here, so it loads or it saves or it creates the application within inside of this folder and not within a new folder. So some people work in different ways. I just prefer to work with the on this level here. So my core application folder is on the same level as the vemp folder here. Okay, so now we've got our core application in place. The first thing that we're probably going to need to do is we're working with users, so we're going to build a new app here. So now we've got the manage Pi available. We're going to use that to start a new app. And then I'm going to call this app users. So I'm going to create a new application where it's dedicated to users. So I'm going to build a new custom model for my users, as you would probably 99% of the time do for your application. So let's just build a new application here for users. I'm just going to save that for you. Okay, so now we've got a new application here. Obviously, we need to go into core, so in the settings, and then we just need to change this. So let's just add users here. So that just registers the application that we've just built, so that when we build our models, etc., they will get recognized, and we can then build our database. Okay, so let's move to part 2. So if you've skipped to part 2, all we've done is we've created a new application and a new app for our users. So now we're just going to focus on building a custom user model. Again, if you're new to Django, what do we mean by a user model? So obviously we want to capture information about the user, their name, their email address, and so on, so we can log them in. Now, Django by default has this model available, this table that we can build for a user. But generally what we want to do is we want to extend it, or we want to completely override it and just make our own model. So we've got two options here. We've got abstract user, which is going to allow us to kind of extend from the existing model that Django provides for us. We've got the abstract base user. So this option allows us to kind of build from scratch. So again, have a look at the tutorial I made on customizing or building your own user model. That'll give you a little bit more in-depth knowledge on how to do that. But we're just going to build a simple kind of extension. So we're going to be utilizing abstract user here, just to extend upon the user fields. So this starts off by, first of all, we're just going to import the abstract user to allow us to kind of extend from the existing model. So we haven't actually built any models yet, so we haven't actually committed that to our database yet. So let's go ahead and just do this. So we've got models, and then we're going to import the abstract user. Let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see what we're doing. So here we are, the abstract user. So we've got the two options here, remember I mentioned. So we're going to use abstract user. We're going to extend from the existing model. So let's just go ahead and build a new class. We're going to call this extend user. And then we're going to bring in the abstract user. And now we can start to define our new fields that we want to include for the user. So we're just going to go ahead and utilize or just build this emails field. So we've got an email field here. Blank equals false. So that means obviously the user must have an email. So we're going to force the user to include or use an email. So by default, Django doesn't actually enforce this. So we're just going to enforce this. Let's just give this a max length of 255. And then let's just give this a verbose name of email. Okay, so that's the email in place. So what we can now do in Django is we can define what we want the user to utilize as the kind of the username field. So we can here define username field equals, and then we can define the username field. So let's just go for username. Now username is obviously already provided in the default model, the user model. So we can utilize that. And then we can also define here, you can see the email field. So we can also define the email field. Maybe you don't want to call it email, for example, but here we're going to define this as the email field. So obviously we are enforcing the user to actually type in an email. Now, obviously we can change this about. Some people prefer utilizing the user's email as the kind of the field that we want to use to log in. And some people will prefer the username field to be the username. Okay, so that's obviously an option that you can utilize. So now we've got this custom table here for a user. We just need to register that in fact we're going to utilize this, or we want Django to utilize this. So what we need to do is just go into the settings here, and maybe just at the bottom, we just need to find or define the auth user model, and that's going to equal, and that's going to be, in this case, users, and then dot, and then the class that we've just created. So this is just telling Django this is going to be the user model. Obviously we're extending the default Django user model. So that just connects that up. Okay, so that's pretty much it for extending the model. So obviously here you can add new fields if you want to, additional fields you might want to collect information about the user. Let's just go ahead now and migrate this. So let's just commit this and I'll just show you what's happening here. So let's go for the, let's go make migrations. And you can see that we're going to build this new model called extend user that we've just built. So we can now go ahead and just kind of migrate this. So migrate is going to allow us to actually build the table, and you can see that we built this database and it's appeared right here. So we're just going to be utilizing SQLite. Of course, you can change this into Postgres or MySQL, whatever you want to use. Okay, so with that model built, we can now move over to installing GraphQL. So obviously we want to be utilizing GraphQL, so we're going to need to set that up. And we're going to be utilizing JWT to kind of authenticate users, JSON web tokens. So let's go ahead and just quickly install those, ready it for the application. So the first software that we're going to install here, or the first package, is Graphene Django. This is going to allow us to utilize Graph in our Django application. So this is really simple. We're just going to follow this. So pip install Graphene Django here. Let's go back into our application. There we go. So that'll take a couple of seconds. I'll just put that in the commands. So that's the first thing that we want to install. The other thing that we want to get ready is the Django GraphQL JWT package. So let's just see this one. So this is just going to allow us to work with JWT with Graph. So let's just copy that and let's just go back into our application and we'll install that too. Okay, so at this point, what you can do is we can just make a requirements file. So pip freeze, and then let's make a requirements text file. Oh, I spelled freeze wrong. There we go. Okay, so that's just going to give me a list of all the apps that have been installed, or the packages that have been installed in this application. Of course, when you replicate this, you'll just need to utilize this to install all these packages so that you can get this application working if you just want to work from the repository. Okay, so let's just go ahead and go into our core settings. Now we've installed those packages, we're just going to need to just add them to the installed apps. So we installed 2 packages. So we installed the Graphene Django. So let's just add this in here. So that's Graphene Django. That's going to come with a few different models. So this is why we're going to include it here within our installed app. So it recognizes those models when we do the migration. And then secondly, we want to also utilize and have refresh tokens with our JWT application. So refresh tokens allow us, the users, to activate or to gather or collect a new token if they haven't been logged in for some time potentially. So let's go ahead and just add that in. So this is going to allow us to create refresh tokens. So if you've seen the previous tutorials, what we know from the previous tutorials is that when we're working with Graph, we're going to need to build a schema, and we need to tell Django where this schema is. So what we can do here at the bottom is just define this. Now in the previous tutorials, we did this in the URL, and I said that there was 2 ways of doing this. So this is the other way of doing it. So we can just define it here in the settings. So what we're going to do is define the schema and basically where this is located. Now our schema is we're going to put this in the, let's put it into the users here. So let's say users dot, then we're going to say look for a file called schema. And inside of that, you'll find a variable with the schema inside of it called schema. Okay, so obviously this doesn't exist yet. We'll build this file in a second, but that's just going to link us to our schema. Now, what we also want to do is, because we're utilizing JWT here, is we're just going to need to bring in this kind of middleware. So let's just bring this in here. Okay, so that just kind of brings in JWT to allow us kind of to utilize that. Now, because we're utilizing a different authentication method, we're also going to need to bring in and tell Django about this new authentication backend. So let's go ahead and do that. And so I won't type this out, I'll just paste this in. There we go. So we've got two options here. We're going to include the JWT backend. So that's going to allow us to kind of utilize our tokens. And we've got the Django backend. Okay, I think that pretty much covers that. So let's go ahead and just migrate that. You can see that I've got a problem here because I didn't use a comma there. So let's just save that and migrate that again. There we go. So we've done some migrations. Now let's just see what's happening here. Let's just create a super user and let's just go into the admin and see if anything has changed. So I'm just going to make a new user called admin, and notice that it's enforcing me now to create an email, and I'll just build a password. It's going to be admin if you want to kind of log in. So I've created this, So I've created a new user here. I've just run the server. So let's just go in and go into the admin here. So you can see that we've got refresh tokens available. Okay, so that's going to show me all the tokens that are currently being utilized by any user that's logged in once we've got this started. But you can see there isn't too much else to note at this point. If we go back into our application here, if you look at the extensions, I've got this SQLite extension here. That allows me to kind of right click and open the database, and then I can start to have a look inside of my database. And this can be pretty handy just to kind of see what's going on. You can see here that we've got a few different tables here. So we've got the user extend user. Now notice here in the users extend user, remember that was the model that I created. All these fields are available, but obviously I didn't include these in. So obviously what's happened here is that I've extended the Django model, and you can see that it's got the username and first name, it's got my email here. So that's all the information that I'm going to be storing about the user. If I were to add any more fields to my user table, obviously it's going to appear here. If we have a look at the other kind of tables that have been made, we've got the users extend users groups. There's nothing too much to say at this point, sorry, in permissions. And you can see the refresh tokens, that's what's just been generated by JWT. Okay, so there isn't really too much there. The rest is just normal Django tables. So that brings us to part 4. So now we've got this baseline in place. We've got the user model. We've set up our backend authentication with JWT initially. And now we need to kind of move on to really what is the main focus of this tutorial. One of the best things about Django, of course, is the library that we can access here to add new functionality to Django very easily. Now, to get this all working, this really is the core of this tutorial and what we're going to be utilizing to build all this functionality that I set out at the start of this tutorial. So Django GraphQL Auth, which is nicely updated, last updated November the 16th. This is going to provide us all the features we're going to build upon to actually build this system in our application. So let's just go ahead and get this installed. Let's just stop the server and let's just get that installed. Okay, so that installs what we need, and it also installs any other dependencies that it requires. So you can see here, for example, it's installed the Django filter, for example, Auth, and it tried to also install Django GraphQL. Obviously, we've already done that. So that pretty much is that step. Now we've got that installed, so we'll need to go into the installed apps just to tell Django that we've installed that. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we need here is it was GraphQL Auth. Okay, so with that in place, what we can now do is we can go back into our settings. Now, what we want to do is we want to get rid of this item here, this backend, and we want to utilize what we've just installed. So let's go ahead and just add a new authentication backend, which is going to be the GraphQL Auth backend. So we want to utilize the new package, the backend that provides. So there we go. So we just swapped that over. Now, if you just want to use JWT without utilizing this Auth backend, you can go and do that. So have a look at this package here and the settings for you to be able to do that. So we're going to basically utilize this new package, which is essentially just a wrapper around all the other applications we've installed. And it's going to help manage those really kind of seamlessly so that we're not writing extraordinary amount of code in order to achieve what we want to achieve. So this now is our backend authentication, our main authentication backend, which is kind of a wrap around JWT and everything else we have in Django here. Okay, sorry for making that maybe a bit too long, but let's go ahead now and just migrate again, because this is going to come with a few different tables, etc. So now we've done that, let's just refresh, see what we've built here. So you can see what we got here. I don't think there's any changes. We've got the GraphQL Auth user status. That I think maybe is a new table that has been built. Let's just go into our, let's run the server. Let's just see if there's any visual changes in our admin site. Okay, it's not actually working. No module name graph auth backend. Okay, so it looks like we've got a little problem here. Okay, I think I missed the S from this item here. So let's just go back in and see if that works now. There we go. So there's nothing visual that's changed here at the moment. But what we can do, if we want to, for example, see all the tables or register all the tables from a particular application and where it's not particularly obvious, we can go ahead and do that. Here we're using an abstract user table. You notice that the table doesn't actually exist in our admin area. So let's just go ahead and just register our new table, which we called, in our models, we call this extend user. So let's go ahead into the admin of users here. Let's just kind of, let's import this in first. So we call this extend user. So that just makes it available. And then we can go ahead and obviously do admin site register. And then let's just bring this in. So that just registers the model with the admin here, so that when we go and refresh, we can now see we've got the users table. So that's the first thing we want to maybe play around with. This is the email field that we've created there. So that's the first model. Now, working with the new package that we've just installed, that's going to come with some tables potentially. Now, that isn't always massively clear if you're familiar with working with the admin area here. It's not always massively clear how you can bring in a model if the model doesn't actually exist here, because this is typically what we do. We bring in the model into admin and then we obviously register it. So what we can also do is we can register models based upon the installed application. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and first of all, we set out this new variable here. So we apps.get app config, and GraphQL Auth. So inside of our settings here, we've created or we've registered our application GraphQL Auth. So what we're going to do essentially here is we're going to grab that, and then we're going to find to see if there's any models, and then we're going to register the models onto admin. So this is just going to be a simple kind of loop here. So for model name, model in app models item. So if there's any models attached to this application that we've installed, it's basically going to loop through them all and just register them. Okay, so the last step here, before we get this working, there was a problem. So we're also going to just need to import apps from Django apps just to connect this up. So with that in place, it still says app is, apps. That should be done. Yep. Okay. So that now, like I said, is going to look for this application, look for any models that are attached to it, and then just going to make them available in the admin area. So if I refresh the home here, you can see we now have refresh tokens and user status. This will just come in handy later. We can actually then go ahead and see who's logged in and their refresh tokens and so on. But that just gives you an idea of how to access some of the models that might be not as clear as, or might be not so obvious when they're not actually detailed inside of your models file. Okay, so we're kind of just about there with this application. We can start potentially utilizing this. There's one thing that we need to do. Or maybe there's two things that we need to do. Let's just do the one thing that we need to do first. So in our side of our core, we're going to need some URLs for our GraphQL, right? So we can put this in our users or we can put it in the core. It doesn't really matter where we put it at this point, at least. Now, to get this working, we're just going to be utilizing the CSRF exempt. That's going to make our life a little bit easier at the moment. And then we're going to need to import GraphQL, the view. So we're going to use the graphical package to allow us to kind of utilize or to create queries in our browser and return data. So if you've seen the previous tutorials, you've seen that interface already. And then we're going to need a new path for our GraphQL. So typically we set up GraphQL as the path, and then we're going to use our CSRF exempt so we can perform operations without worrying about our CRF tokens. And then you can see that we're going to utilize the views from the GraphQL package. And that's pretty much it really at this point. So that basically just is going to set up a path to allow us to access our GraphQL view, and we can utilize that kind of graphical interface to interface our system. So yeah, the final thing that we need to do before I forget is obviously build a schema. So inside of here, we're going to build a new file. Remember, we put it inside the users. We defined this in the settings. So we're going to need to build a schema. So let's call this schema.py. And yeah, let's just go in settings. At the bottom here, we defined our schemas inside of the users. So let's just save that and close. Let's just close up here. Okay, so in the users, we have a schema. Right. So the first thing we need to do in our schema is import graphene, because that's what we want to use to support and to be able to utilize GraphQL in the back end. And then what we're going to do now is from GraphQL Auth, we're going to bring in some pre-existing classes. So there are a number of them, and this is just going to allow us to kind of abstract some of the functionality that we don't need to build. So GraphQL Auth comes with loads of different great facilities. So what we're going to do initially, is bring in import user query and me query. So this is going to allow us to run queries really quickly, really easily. The me query is really cool because we can find out about that particular user utilizing the me query. So obviously what we need to do now is build our query set. So this is pretty much it. So we're going to pass in abstracts, again, a lot of the functionality because we're utilizing this new tool, GraphQL Auth. So our query is going to be made up of user query, the me query, that's going to be brought in, and graphene object type. So these are just two kind of classes that have already been pre-made in the GraphQL Auth package. We're just basically going to bring them into the query. So there's nothing we need to do here. Everything is kind of sorted via the app that we've installed. So the last thing obviously we need to do is just build schema. Now this might seem familiar if you've seen gone through the previous tutorials. Obviously what we're not doing here is we're not defining any of the tables. That's all going to be dealt with by our new package. So yeah, literally that is it. So to build our query, we're just going to bring that in, the classes in, and our schema is going to be our query here. So that's going to provide us access to our data. It's pretty much that simple. So what we're going to need to do is just, because when we install GraphQL Auth, it did also install the Django filters app. So let's just go ahead in our settings and just make sure that that's included. There we go. So the Django filters is just a handy kind of tool really that helps us write or create filters on a query set. So that's just something that the GraphQL Auth package utilizes to kind of simplify some of these features that it offers. Okay, so we've got these settings now complete. We've got this in place. So probably what we can now do is just remind ourselves of the URL that we're using. So GraphQL. Let's just go into the front end here. And there we go. So here we have the GraphQL front end here. This is where we can actually now type our graph queries. So at this point, we've only got one user installed, remember. So pretty much, yeah, the one user, the admin user, that's the only user we have here. So you can go ahead and add some more data if you want or would like to. But let's just now go ahead and, well, let's just add another user. Let's just add, so we've got two users. Let's just call this user one today now. So the username is going to be user one, first name, user, first name, just so we can see this data, user last name. So when we return data, it just makes it a little bit more obvious what data we're returning. Is active, yep. User one, okay. Let's just press save. Okay, so now we have a new user. So we've got two users now. Okay, so let's go back in and let's build a statement here. Okay, so we've got query. Which seems to be wrong, but okay. So we've got users. So let's bring in users. And in our users, no doubt, we've got some edges. So edges are basically going to allow us to extract all the information about users or all users. So here we're going to go into the node, and then we're going to define the information we want to return. So in this case, we just basically want to return, oh, I spelled that wrong. Basically, we just want to return the username. So let's just run this simple query here. And there we go. So we have two users, admin and user one. And of course, we can collect whatever information we want at this point. So for example, we want just their email and then so on. So this is the query we're going to run from the front end if we were going to build in React, etc. And this is the data that's being returned. And you can see that that's the data that's being returned. So clearly everything is working at this point. So let's just clear this up in simple terms here. So in previous tutorials, this is going to look very familiar, right? So this is a little bit abstract here. We know we utilize query users. Where does users come from? So if you want to start asking yourself these questions here, let's go back into our schema. Your schema should answer all those queries. Now, in previous tutorials, we built some classes or the query, and we would have defined users, for example. Now, obviously, we're not doing that here because GraphQL Auth already has those. It's just going to bring in those in a really kind of abstract way. We can't see them here. So this is where you're going to have a look at the manual and see what's available so that you can kind of bring this data in. So that's where it might be a little bit confusing. Well, where is users actually attached to? Now, again, it does help if you've seen the previous tutorials. You should probably have a better idea of what I'm talking about here. So maybe if you don't, maybe if you go back to the previous tutorials, just to give you a better idea of what's going on before you complete this tutorial, maybe that's a good idea or something you can do later. So that's why you're not seeing users here and why we're able to access the query users, because it's being abstracted here by user query and me query, which is coming from the GraphQL Auth package. So next up is edges. So this is basically a way of getting a collection of objects, edges. Let's just leave it at that. So we want users, and we're saying here we want to collect all the users. We want to get a collection of users. Okay, so that's what that keyword there is. So node is another keyword that we've not used before. So basically here, what we're saying is that each edge has data. So each edge has a record or data, and we're referring to that data as node. So essentially what we're saying here is look for users or the user table. Inside of the user table, collect all the data. And now I want some data. So I define what data I want by utilizing node. And then I can now define the items that I want to collect and return. So username and email. There we go. So we can obviously collect more data depending on what's available. If I type in a letter, you can see it's picking up all the different fields that is available. So for example, is active. There we go. So it's either true or false, etc. So again, remembering this is what we're going to run from the front end in React or Vue or whatever. This is the data that's going to get returned. So what we've done there really with the user queries, we were using the user query here. So let's have a look at what this me query provides us here, or this me query functionality, sorry. So what this is going to enable us to is to collect information about the user very directly. So we use me, and then we can basically just define what data we want to collect. Now we are collecting only one item from one user. So here we don't need to utilize edges and nodes, etc. So me and then just username. And there we go. So I am logged in as the admin. So you can see that I'm returning the admin information back. And there we go. So you can see that's going to be pretty useful later on, particularly in your application to get information about the particular user that's currently logged in. Okay, right. So next up, we'll have a look at some registrations. So part 5 then, let's now try and set up user registration. Now I did mention at the start of this tutorial that we'll go ahead and we'll have some sort of email confirmation. Now again, in Django, there's plenty of ways we can set up different email clients and facilities, etc. No doubt that your business or your plan to utilize X, Y, and Z service for your emails. Now, apologize again, because I always get a few different comments asking me to set up with this email client or this email service, etc. In this tutorial, we're just going to be utilizing the backend here. So we're going to set up the parameter email backend to utilize the Django backend for emails, and the email is then going to basically be sent to this console here. So let's just go into the settings. Maybe I didn't explain that very well, but basically Django is going to handle the emails by sending the email to this terminal, and we're going to print out the email that would have been sent to the user. Now, obviously, you can change these settings, go into the Django documentation, have a look for the documentation to kind of set it up with your particular email client. I have done a tutorial on utilizing, for example, Gmail, how to set up Django with Gmail. Have a look at those tutorials if you want to set up with Gmail. Now, like I said, this is basically going to send the email to the console, simulating the email sending to the user. Okay, so that's what the email set up now for that. So now we can now go ahead and set up the mutations we're going to need to register a user. So let's go over to our schema. Now, obviously the schema here, again, if you've seen the previous tutorials, this is where we're going to set up our query. And if we want to add data, we need to set up a mutation. Right, so first thing that we need to do from GraphQL Auth is we're going to need to implement the mutation or import mutations to allow us to kind of save some data. And now we need to set up a mutation for this. So let's just move that up there. So we've got our query. So now let's add a new class here for mutation. So we're going to call this auth mutation. We've set up the graph object type. And then we've got the register equals mutation register field. Now these are parameters here that are just set in stone, hence why I didn't write it out. So if you look at the GraphQL Auth package, you'll see there are a number of different settings that are already predefined. So this is what we need to utilize for registration. Now, obviously, we now need to, this is obviously passing in the fields. So what we need to do now, we've got the fields and the data. We're going to need to set out a new class for mutation like we do with the query. There we go. So here we're bringing in the auth mutation. That's essentially the fields that we're utilizing. And of course, we now need to just extend our schema to utilize our new mutation, which is called mutation. There we go. So now we've kind of connected that up. Again, I keep repeating myself. If you've seen the previous tutorials, that it's going to make a little bit more sense what's going on. So I'm running the server now. So the server is turned on. So what we can probably do now in a second is register. But what we're going to need to do first is set up, because we want to connect this to JWT, of course. So what we're going to need to do is create a new setting for graph JWT in our settings. So let's go to settings here. So here we're going to set out to build that connection between GraphQL and JWT, GraphQL JWT. We're going to set that up here. We're going to bring in the GraphQL Auth mutations register. So that's basically just going to connect things up in the background so that GraphQL Auth is working with GraphQL JWT package. And we can kind of connect those up and provide JWT tokens to the user once they've registered. So now we've got that in place. Everything is nicely connected. We should now be able to go back into our front end and, well, register a new user. So this time we want mutation because we want to run a mutation, and it should, maybe not. Okay. Let's just refresh. We should get a little bit more. Yeah, it should now pop up. Okay. So don't forget, obviously, most of the time you're going to need to just refresh this page if you make any changes to your files, particularly the schema. So you can see it's automatically picking up the register. So, right, so to register, we're going to need an email, username, password. Yeah, so email, that's going to equal a new email. So let's go C. So we've got B and A already. So that's the email in place. Then we're going to need a username. So this is just going to follow your database. So don't forget the email was mandatory. We made that mandatory. So the username, we're going to call this user2. So we've already got user1 and then so on. So what we're going to need here is password1. You can see that password1 and password2. So it's prompting us with all the fields. So let's just set up a new password. So we need password1 and password2. There we go. And there we go. So what's great about this is we can now start to define, well, what do we actually want to return? Now, if we think about this as an application, when we create a new user, really what we want is a signal from the server. Remember, this is the front end we're working with here. What we want is a signal from the back end to tell us that a user was successfully created. So we can pass, or we can bring back a lot of different data. So what we can do down here now is we can bring back a Boolean, true or false, whether it was successful or not. We can also return any errors. So this is a great package that we're utilizing here that provides this type of functionality, and this really kind of speeds up production of your application a lot. So obviously what we also want is our token. So we're going to bring back two things for the user. We're using JWT, if you're not familiar with that. Apologies, I'm not going to explain or give any information about JWT. There are plenty of other tutorials in the channel, kind of give you some background to that. So we also want the refresh token. So let's bring in the refresh token. I'm not too sure why that isn't coming up automatically. So we'll see that in a second. So we've got the refresh token as well that we want to bring back to the user. So let's go. And the refresh token isn't quite working at this second. So let's have a look to see what the problem is. Okay, so if you go into the settings in the GraphQL JWT settings, I forgot to add the JWT verify expiration. That needs to be true. So that's just basically saying that the JWT token will expire, and we're going to need a refresh token. So that's just going to trigger the fact that we're going to build or utilize a refresh token in our application. So if you want any more details there, just have a look at the GraphQL JWT documentation. That's going to give you a little bit more information about that. But essentially that's going to be needed if we want to use a refresh token, as well as, remember, up the top here, we added that into our installed app here. Okay, so with that in place, I refresh my GraphQL page and I go, and you can see here that there seems to be an error. Cannot query field refresh token. Okay, so let's just refresh. I'll just make sure that that is saved and refresh. Okay, so we've still got a problem here. So if we just consult the documentation again, we're going to also probably need the other setting, which is JWT long running refresh. So this is also going to be connected to the refresh token, set to obviously refresh tokens are obviously normally set to a longer expiry date or time than the JWT token. So with that setting in place, everything seems to be working now. So we can press execute to execute our query. Now you can see here that the password, we've got some messages here, which is great. So you can see here straight away that success equals false. So this is what's returning to the front end. And this is great information because now we can obviously set up our front end to perform these different actions based upon what's being returned. And this is really clear. This is really simple to work with. So obviously the password is too common. So let's just go ahead and just create something crazy. There we go. So let's change the password again, and let's press to execute, and there we go. So we've now just registered a new user. We've got our token, we've got our refresh token. Obviously that would be passed to the front end, and we can deal with that. And we can now utilize that to work with this user in our system. Okay, so that was incredibly easy to register a user. Hopefully you agree. Let's go back into our admin here, and let's just refresh and see that. So we now have our new user. That's what we've just set up. Okay, so if you remember at the start of the previous task, I said about the email and setting up the email for account verification. So let's have a look at this now, the account verification. Now, if we go back into our console here, you can see if I just move up a little bit, when we activated this user, this email was sent to the user. Now, remember that I've set up the settings so that we would just capture the email and print it into the terminal. that's what we've got at the moment. Obviously, you can change this email backend, like I said previously, and add it to whatever email service you want to utilize. But you can see this is the email. So hello user 2, please activate your account. So the user can utilize this link, follow this link, and activate their account. So if we go into the admin again, you can see that if I go into users and user 2, you can see it does say active here. So the user is active, but if I go into the user status and go to user number 2, you can see here that they're not verified. Okay, so that's the important bit. So GraphQL Auth has created a new table, and this new table is designated to be utilized to verify the user. So the user signs up, an email is sent to them, and then when they click on that, then they become verified, and then they can log in to the system. So what's going to happen here then, just to explain, if you're working on the front end, if you're trying to do this on the front end, obviously this link doesn't work. It won't work because we haven't set up the URL. So what we would need to do on the front end is we'd need to make a new path and a page that can handle this link and take this code here and utilize this code to verify the user. So what would happen is this user would click on this link from their email, that would take them to that page, and we'd need to build that page so it extracts this, this key here and then sends it off to the server to verify the user. So obviously now we're just working in the back end here. So let's set up that verification option. So obviously this is going to need for us to change our schema, because we want to now also set up a new kind of mutation, because we want to make a change in the database. We want to tick that box that we saw in the admin area here. So we're going to need to make a mutation. So let's go ahead now and just extend. So we've got register. So now we want verify. So again, this is directly from the GraphQL Auth package. And we're just going to copy and paste that in. Okay, so now we've got that in place. We now also need to go into our settings. And let's go back up here into our GraphQL. So we've done register. And now we're going to be doing a verify account. Okay, so we want to kind of connect that up with JWT. So let's go back into our schema. That's all done. Okay, so literally that's it. That's all we need to do. So let's go back into our front end here. Let's just close that. Right, so how are we going to do this? So we're going to need the code. So let me just go back into here. So this is the code that we're going to need right here. So let me just take that. Just make sure I've copied. Oh, just make sure I've copied that. I think I've copied that. Yep. Okay, so we're going to need that. So let's build our new query here. So this is going to be another mutation. We're going to utilize, okay, we're going to need a refresh. Oh, and the server's not on. That doesn't help. Okay, let's just turn the server on. So we're going to need a mutation, and this time we're going to verify account. Notice it kind of picks it up. So what we're going to need to do is pass in a parameter, right? So we know how to do that from the previous tutorial. So token, and then we're going to need our token. So that's my token that I want to utilize. That's from my email. So that's my token. And then I can just now define what I want to return. So again, this is a great package to utilize because I can return, for example, if I do this properly, I can return success, for example, and then any errors. So let's go ahead and try this, see if we can verify this user. And there we go. So it's success and we didn't have any errors. So we've just verified that user. So let's go back into here. We'll refresh for user 2 and you can see now we're verified and now the user can log in. Okay, so hopefully you agree that was incredibly simple to set up. We now have a verification service available. Like I keep saying, apologies. Now you can obviously go ahead and set up your email with your provider. Okay, so now we can go ahead in part 7 and log a user in. So let's set up everything that we need to get a user to log in. So as you might imagine, we're going to need to, on the front end, we would build a front end with a form, and the user is going to need to type in their username and their password. So what we're going to need to do is obviously extend our schema again. We're going to utilize the tools from GraphQL Auth to do that, of course. So let's do that. There we go. So that's our token auth. And then, as you might imagine, you can see the kind of the pattern here in our settings. We're now going to add our GraphQL Auth mutation, obtain JSON web token. So obviously when the user logs in, we want to obtain a JSON web token for them. Okay, so that is going to go there. And now what we need to do, would you believe it or not, is just log the user in. Okay, so it should be as simple as that. So let's go back into our front end here, and let's go ahead and just refresh this. Right, so now we have a mutation because we want to make a user. So we're going to change the database. So it is a mutation. So we're going to have token auth. We're going to need the username. So these are the parameters we want to pass in, the username. We're going to just use the admin and then password. Now this isn't going to work, but I'm just going to show you this. Because the admin hasn't actually registered. Because we made the admin before we built the system, it isn't part of the system yet. So this actually won't work. So I might as well just make a new user, haven't I? So let's just go ahead and do that. Let's go to users, admin. So let's just delete this admin. Okay, and let's just make a new super user. So like I said, because we've made this admin user before we set up the system, it won't be registered for us to be able to kind of activate them onto the system. So let's just build another super user. So let's just make things a lot easier to work with. Okay, so we've made a new user. Let's just log them in again. Now, another reason why I showed you how to access the user status is because you can see now when I go to user status, I've got my admin and the admin isn't verified. So it just allows me to easily verify them so I can actually log them in just to show that's the case. So I just press save there. So now I've got that in place. Let's just go back, apologies, to here. And now we can kind of just finish this off. So password is going to be admin2. That's what we've just set up. So that's that in place. And now, of course, what we can do as per normal is just return anything that we want. So success, we can check to see if they're logged in, errors, and this is going to help us on the front end to build what we need to build. So we obviously want a token and we want the refresh token. So let's just bring that back. Now, lots of questions from the other tutorials that I've made about, well, how do I access user information? Because obviously what you want to do is log the user in and get their information too, so you can use it within the system. So this is incredibly simple because what we can now do is we can just define user here, and then we can now say, well, what data we want from the user. So let's just get their username, for example. So this is just going to extend the query into the user and allow me to gather that information too. So let's see if we can use it, do that, and there we go. So we've logged in successfully. We've got our tokens, refresh and normal token, and we've got the user information too. So that was really simple. So let's move over to the update account. So someone can now register, they can log in, and of course they may want to update their account details. So let's take a look at how to do that. So this is super simple. What we need here is just the update account, the mutation from the GraphQL Auth package. There we go. And that is literally it. So the problem here now is that if we go to the front end, we run this mutation here so we can update the first name, for example. Obviously, that isn't going to work for all users because in order for us to update, we need to be able to authenticate ourselves. So if I were user 1 and I wanted to update my details, you'd expect I'd need a JWT token, a session active, so that I can update my details. Now, if you were to log in as the admin on Django and to run this mutation here to update, you can see that it works. And I've updated the user. So let me just show you this again. So I'm logged in as admin, remember, so I can press go. You can see that it's updated the admin user information. So when I go to my admin user here in the background, you can see it's updated the first name. And that's just because really that I'm logged in as the admin here. Obviously, what we want to do is to update users who are logged in, but we need to utilize the JWT token, pass that across to the server to identify the user as logged in. So what we're going to do now, I've opened up Postman here. I've showed you this a few times in different tutorials. This is going to allow us to simulate the front end, so we can pass details across to our back end. And so just think of this as React, but we're going to set up all of our queries here and send it across to our server. So let's have a look what we got here. So first of all, let's go ahead and go into our post. Just make sure it's selected post here. And obviously we want to define the endpoint of GraphQL, which is right here, right? So then we can go into the body. So we want to make this is a password reset. So what we want to do here is go into GraphQL, and let's just go back into our interface here. So we're going to copy this across. So inside of our GraphQL here, this is our mutation. So we want to change the password. Okay, so right. So let's just extend, or let's just change this password to something else. Oh, sorry, username, sorry, to something else. So let's we're going to post it to GraphQL endpoint. We're going to send this here, and we press send. Okay. So notice what is returned is false. So this isn't working. Now, that's obviously what I'm expecting, and wasn't expecting it to work, because what I also need to do is send across my JSON token, because I want to authenticate with the server. So if I go into headers, here I can actually set up authorization and the value. So apologies, this is kind of really small here. Hopefully you can just about see what's going on here. So we need to set up two parameters here, authorization and our JWT token. Notice that there's a prefix of JWT. That's important to remember. So this is the key value that I need to send. So I need to find out what my JWT token is. So let's just go back into our graph front end here. What we're going to do now is just, you can see that we're going to log in as admin. So we do that, and you can see that we're now provided our token right here. So this is our JWT token. So I'm going to copy that in, go back into Postman here. So this is a new tab. We're inside of headers. We're going to add the key as authorization, and the value is JWT, and then our new key. So I'm going to paste my key right there. So that's my new key. And then go back to body and just make sure that I want to update my details. Just make sure that the GraphQL statement is correct. Looks okay. Let's just change that and then press send. And there we go. So now we've got success. Now we're utilizing our JWT token. That's the token that has been given to the user when they've logged in to authenticate them. We can now see we've got the success. So we can check that by going into our admin, and our first name should have changed if I refresh. And there we go. So that's what I've just typed in, AAA, blah, blah, blah. So you can see that our JWT token and our update user details is working correctly. Okay, so there might be occasions where the user has not received an email when they've created an account, so they can't confirm or they can't activate themselves to be able to log into the system. So let's have a look at how to resend a confirm email. So let's go back into our schema. What we need to do now is just incorporate the GraphQL Auth resend activation email setting here. So there we go. So that's pretty much the mutation that we're going to need. Resend activation email. So once we've got this in place, we can now go back into our front end. So let's do that. And we now can set out, or we'll just do a refresh. We can now set this out. So we're going to need a page where a user can click on a button, and that button will send off or fire off this mutation here. So we're going to use a resend activation email. So this is what we want to send to the server. And then what we need the user to be able to define is their email. So in actual fact, this page is going to look like a form. So the user is going to type in their email. They're going to press the button, and this is going to be sent off to the server. And that's going to activate an email to send to the user again if their email has been registered when they built the account. So let's go ahead and just add this parameter here. So let's do we know the admin as a.a.com. So that's the email we want to send to. And then we can also, as per normal, we can just set out if we want any errors, etc. Now, this is where you probably don't want to utilize success, because we don't want, for example, someone who's trying to look to see what emails are available in the system can access some sort of success Boolean of true. So let's just go for maybe errors, or we would deal with this differently in the system, but we're just going to have errors here. So let's just try this. So account already verified. Oh, so we can't do that. So let's just do B. And there we go. So that should have been sent off. Now let's go back into our terminal here. Go down to the bottom. You can see that we've captured the email that's been sent. Please activate your account on this link. And there we go. Sorry, I say there we go. Obviously, utilize what we did before, whereby we use this. This would be the same page. So the normal page where we ask people to, when they click on this link, and that then registers them or activates them, this can be utilized on that same path. Okay, so let's move over now to, for example, how to activate or change your password if you've forgotten it. Okay, so I think it's part 10, forgotten password. So obviously there's users who will forget their password. We want to email a link to them so that we can then allow them to change their password. So again, this is going to involve an email. So let's just go back into here. So what we got now is the option to send password reset email. Here we go. So that's the mutation that we want to bring in from GraphQL Auth package. So once that's in place, what we need is a query for that. So let's go back in here and refresh. Okay, so we're going to need a mutation for this. This one is going to be send password email reset. And then obviously what we need to do at this point is define the email and then the email address. So let's just do b@b.com. There we go. And the same rules apply again. We can just set up any kind of error control or messages that we want to include for any logic on our front end. So let's send an email reset for this. There we go. So success equals true. So let's go back in. So in our terminal, we should have received a new email. So at the bottom here, it says reset your password on this link. So now we need to actually allow them to reset their password. So let's go back into our schema, add in password reset field. There we go. So we're going to need the code from the password, the code from the email here to make a password reset. So let's go back in, make a new mutation. So we want the password. In this case, it's going to be password, refresh again, password reset. And then from here, the password reset, we're going to need to pass in a few different things here. So we want the token. That's the token from the email. We're then going to also take in the parameter for the new password one. I should have done this in separate lines. New password one, and then that's going to be whatever new password one is. And then of course, new password two. Sorry for the formatting here, you get the idea. Obviously, they need to be the same. And then as per normal, we can just take in success and so on. So that's pretty much the format. I won't press go on that because I don't want to change the password, but that's essentially what needs to be included from the front end to make the password change. So at this point, you probably got the idea of what's going on here and how the pattern of which to work to get this working. So predominantly we're using Django GraphQL Auth. Okay, so that's what we've been using. That's what we've been building upon to build all the functionality that we've mentioned in this tutorial. Now, if you head over to the documentation, you'll see much of what I've already covered. And so if you go over to, for example, the quick start, that'll take you through the basic steps to get to the point where you'll, I think, log in a user in. So that'll take you through the steps again if you need to follow that. At the end here, this has all the full schema that's available. So here you've got register, verify account, resend, password reset, password change, delete account, update account, send secondary email activation, verify second, and so on. So you've got, these are all the different classes that we have available, or mutations that we have available, and all the features that it offers. So the idea is that we utilize these. Now, if we go over to the API, that's then going to give you an idea of, on the right-hand side here, you can see all the different options that are available. So if you need to work out or need the code for example, refresh token, here's the GraphQL that you're going to need for that. And of course, you'll just need to match that across and make sure that you incorporate the right mutation for that. And there we go. That is how simple it is to utilize this to build a login, logout, or user management feature for the back end of your system. So if this is something you seriously want to use for your application, then have a look through the documentations, get a full idea of what's included in this package. Obviously now we need to kind of incorporate this all into the front end, and this isn't really part of this series. But at some point, like I said, I'll put this into a React or Vue application so that we can see it working with the front end. So thank you very much for listening, and hopefully this was useful and it's kind of pointed you into the right direction if this is something that you want to develop. Thank you very much, and hopefully I'll see you in the next tutorial.